Mitchell has his head up, takes the feet. Oh, my! Donovan!
Get that weak stuff out of here!
Welcome back to the Junkyard Pod. I'm your host, Tony Pesta, alongside my co-host, Jackson Flickinger, and we are joined today by special guests Corey Walsh and Mac Perry of the It's Cavalier podcast. On today's episode, we will be going over some burning questions about the Cleveland Cavaliers' upcoming season, setting expectations, discussing the make or break factors, and going over a few rapid-fire questions near the end of the episode. Before we get started today, if you are new to the Junkyard Pod and have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. We are available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, and you can follow all of us on X, aka Twitter, for more Cavs content as we prepare for the new season. I want to start today with the biggest news of the summer. NBA champion and part-time Kardashian Tristan Thompson is back in Cleveland. Everyone's favorite mailbag question is usually, which former Cavs player would you add to the current roster? And no one ever really says Tristan Thompson, but I guess he's the answer to that one now. I think everyone here, at least, is pleased with the decision to bring Tristan back. I'll start off passing this to either one of our guests, Mac and Corey. How do you feel about Tristan's homecoming?
Personally, as you put it, this came out the blue. This is not something that anybody was expecting. But as far as 14th men in the roster go, this is a hell of a signing, in my opinion. I'm not going to harbor any expectations whatsoever of this man stepping on the court and helping. But I wouldn't be surprised if he did. 8 seasons in the top 20 of offensive rebounds. We know that's what he does well. And we know that's an area that the Cavaliers have struggled at the past couple of seasons, especially in that playoff series against the Knicks. So even if it's a mentor type role, any type of advice that he could provide to the bigs, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, etc., it's going to be monumental in my opinion. And this is a signing that I feel like they could have done much worse. The market in regards to big men wasn't exactly flush at this point in the offseason. Your options kind of were dwindling down to the JaVale McGee's who already got signed, DeMarcus Cousins of the world, guys who, at one point in time were fairly good players, but all come with red flags now. And I think that's the thing with this roster addition. If you're going to sign somebody at that 14th spot, why not an NBA champion, somebody who has experience doing the things that the Cavs need to work on right now? So excellent addition. But again, I'm not expecting him to step out on the court anytime soon.
Yeah, after the Cavs decided to let go of multiple fan favorites in this past year and a half, it was nice for the fans that they have a rallying point. There's a familiar face from the past championship team. And I think Tristan Thompson, you couldn't do a lot worse with someone who could fit that role, like a vibes guy, someone who's going to mentor, someone who's going to remind the team of what to do when times are tough. Be like back when I was battling it out with LeBron over the past few years, we learned this in the postseason, help guys mentally prepare. And I think this was also kind of the first signing for DG. I feel like because when DG was in his rookie year, I feel like Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love were the two veterans that took him under their wing. And I think this was more to kind of, ease the boat. Because like who on this roster besides Donovan Mitchell were the Cavs really going to turn to for postseason experience, especially if Ricky is going to be out for the long future as far as we know. But hey, what are we going to do? You got to have Tristan Thompson back because it wasn't going to be Delly. It wasn't going to be Kevin Love for reasons that I'm not going to go into. And unfortunately, it wasn't JR.
When looking at the 14th spot on the roster, you're not expecting a guy who's going to play minutes anyway. You're really just looking for kind of that leader, that mentor role. And I will say, comparing it to, the Robin Lopez signing of last year, I do think Tristan has more to offer on court than Robin Lopez did, or even really on the same level as those other guys that we mentioned as options for the 14th spot. So not expecting him to play, but he does rebound. He has always been kind of a hustle energy guy. So I could definitely see him throughout the season getting those random moments where he gets into the game and makes a little bit of a difference, kind of almost not too different from like Lamar Stevens, though in a much smaller role probably. But I like the Tristan signing from basically all angles. I think he's a good leader. Think he's been there before. That's something important to add to this team. As Corey mentioned, you really only had Donovan Mitchell, who had any sort of playoff experience, and he hasn't really been too deep in the playoffs himself. So having someone who has been through adversity at this stage in the Cavs timeline where they're really going through it right now and they need someone to help lead them into whatever's going to come next. I think Tristan was as good of a signing as you can get at this stage in the offseason.
Still just 32 years old. He could definitely give you, he's got some basketball years left in him if used correctly. Obviously, it wouldn't be ideal to have him out there in the playoff rotation, but anything he can give, even if it's taking a few minutes off of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, Damian Jones from time to time to give him some rest.
One thing that I kind of hope rubs off on this group, I think, in like the aftermath of the Knicks series, we've all been harping about rebounding and things like that. And we know that, a Cavs team with Tristan Thompson on it does that to other opposing front courts and doesn't have that done to, their own. But so it's like you would hope that maybe he can impart some kind of wisdom there. But one of the things that I think has often been undervalued with what Tristan Thompson brings is his ability to understand spacing on the offensive end. He's somebody who is a really good screen setter, and he's somebody who understands that even though he has no shooting or, dribbling capabilities, he's still someone who always finds a way to use his space to his advantage, whether that is the offensive rebounds. That's one of the reasons why he was so impactful, is because he, was on those teams with, great teammates around him, but he also, kind of used that to his advantage to kind of get in those positions and stuff like that. And, for this team to work, it needs to have Jared Allen and Evan Mobley really being the most optimized versions of themselves. And, maybe Tristan Thompson can somehow help them kind of become that, especially on the offensive end of the floor, where we've seen, the spacing has been an issue, and really their inability to like set screens and kind of struggling sometimes with how and where to be on the floor. So maybe Tristan can kind of help in those areas there.
Tristan might also help in the sense of giving the big guys more of that like fuck you mentality, because I think the common complaint with the Cavs big men is that they're just nice guys and they don't really seem to have a tenacity to them on the floor. And I don't feel like Tristan had that same sentiment when he was on the floor. Don't think players around the league were like, man, Tristan's like just one of the nicest people out there. He was pretty good at getting under opposing players' skin. And I think that is something that is a big reason why the Knicks really dominated the Cavs in the way that they did, because those Knicks bigs, they definitely had that mentality. And I think it kind of really caught the Cavs off guard.
You're not successful against the Draymond Greens of the world, in Golden State, if you don't have some type of mental toughness to you out there. And he is brash. He'll let you know, y'all not going to fuck around with me. So I think that's from a mentality standpoint, Cavaliers definitely needed that. Guys like Jared Allen, who people consider a big softy, and then Evan Mobley's a quiet guy. So this is an addition that could pay.
Definitely. That's along the lines of what I was going to say. It's just, I don't know how much of that stuff can really rub off on someone. Like if that's your personality, you're not going to be brash and like kind of the enforcer. I don't know how much Tristan can pass that along to those guys, but if anyone's going to do it, he's one of the better candidates to help out. And hey, even if he only gets on the court for a couple minutes, he can bring that himself. I think one thing this Cavs team was missing was an enforcer type, and Tristan should be able to fill that role to some degree. So really, it's a low risk, like moderate reward situation here. So I'm happy with the move overall. It came out of nowhere and it made me smile. So I'll take it. Moving along here, just to kind of set expectations for the upcoming season, I think it's important to get a feel for where everyone is at with this team. Jackson, I'll start off with you this time. How are you feeling about the Cavs right now compared to this time last season?
I'm more optimistic about their regular season chances. I think, we saw throughout the season some growing pains, and I think that's kind of partially to do with, Donovan being brought in so late in the game. And they still were a very successful regular season team that really should have won more games than they did. I think they left a couple on the table. So if we're talking from a regular season perspective, I think that this is a team that's still on the upswing in terms of wins. So it's like when I'm looking at what was the number, 50.5 wins for the over under, I would be I would be shocked if they didn't get over that. I think they're going to do better than they did last year. I think this is this could be a 55 plus win team. So barring any crazy injuries, I'm optimistic about the regular season. Now the playoffs, that's where the questions are going to be, but we know that the Evan Mobley and Jared Allen front court really works in the regular season, and when you have that baseline of defense that those two provide, you're going to win a lot of games.
Jackson, with JB increasing his win total in the regular season, 22, 44, 51 each season, when does it become to be no more about the regular season and more so about the postseason in regards to his tenure here?
I would say as soon as you don't get embarrassed like you did in the first round against the Knicks, if they have a good showing against the Knicks, I think you're not as concerned about the playoffs as you are now. Now it's like they had a great regular season. All their metrics were great. They were a top 10 offense, top 10 defense, had one of the best net ratings in the league. And then you just get smoked by a team that, we can agree, we can, argue about how good the Knicks actually are, but they're not a good enough team to beat the Cavs as handily as they did and kind of in the fashion that they did, especially just, I know people talk about, well, the defensive rating for the Cavs in the playoffs was really good. But if you just watch that game, if you watch those games, that, hey, that's not really good defense. It's not good defense when you're giving up so many offensive rebounds. It's not good defense when the other team is kind of just getting to their spots and dictating the terms. So it's like until we have proof that JB is the guy who can lead them through a series like that, I think it's always going to be about the playoffs for this team and not really about what they do in the regular season, because we know JB is a great 82 game coach.
I think that's fair. Like when I look at it in comparison to last season where we were at fresh off the Donovan Mitchell acquisition, which, that was just such a crazy addition to me in the first place, because prior to that, I would have been perfectly fine rolling into the 2022-23 season with Lauri Markkanen, with Colin Sexton, add in the additional spacing of Ochai Agbaji. I was all set with that. But then we added Donovan Mitchell, which at first I was kind of on the fence about just because of the amount of rotation players that we were sending out in place of him. But quickly dispelled all notions of that. And I will say all the excitement is kind of worn off for me. Like it's great. I'm very happy that we have a top 15, top 20 player in the NBA. But at this point right now, the optimism for me is no longer tied to the win-loss record. For me, it's the development. Like I need to see guys like Evan Mobley take that next step offensively. I need to see Jared Allen go out there and add more to his post game. I just need to see some of the development. That's where my optimism stems from.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think my excitement was higher last season, but I'm still very excited about the team this year. It's just last year's excitement came a lot from the arrival of Donovan Mitchell and a lot of these question marks of like, how good can this team be? And now I think we've started to see those gaps and those issues in the roster started to show themselves and maybe the limitations of this team. And I think where most of my optimism this year is coming from is, well, I think if they were ever going to fill those gaps, the front office has done as good of a job as you can reasonably ask with the additions of Max Strus and George Niang. So I'd like to know what you guys think about just the addition of Strus and Niang, and if that can help raise their ceiling, or if it's really, how much of a difference is that going to make for this team?
Well, I kind of want to kind of jump off what like Mac was saying about kind of like the process over the results real quick. And it does tie back to the shooting. It's like, I guess if the Cavs were still a very successful team like they were last season, but they were successful in a way that you felt was transferable, like if they're a team that, like if Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland are actually moving off the ball with each other and not kind of just taking a your turn, my turn approach, if, Jared and Evan Mobley are really progressing and showing that they can play together, then I guess I would be more positive, so it's like, you want to see the shooting and those additions that they have. You want to see them really play to their potential, and you want to see JB use them like you would like to see them used. Like,
I think that's the number one thing right there. Because that was the number one complaint with fans last season with the way that JB was using some of the players that we already had on the roster, not being able to call plays out of timeouts, things like that, not being able to put guys in position that best utilize their specific skill sets. When I think about that, I think about guys like Isaac Okoro, Lamar Stevens, players who, could thrive in transition, but we play at such a slow ass pace that you're not really getting the best out of these guys. And this is the way I think about it, guys. Donovan Mitchell had 31 games last season in which he scored 30 or more points. I want to see that. As awesome as that is, I want to see that number go down, because I want to see some of the front court. I want to see the front court take the load off of the guard's shoulders. I want to see Evan Mobley, like I was saying, take that next step from an offensive standpoint. I think the additions of Strus and Niang will help with that via the obvious reason, spacing, right? It's going to give them more passing lanes, more driving lanes to be able to kick out. But even with that being said, all of that is going to be a moot point if JB is unable to use them to their strengths. You see how Eric Spoelstra was able to craft specific plays tailored to Max Strus's skill set. You saw how Doc Rivers and company were able to use George Niang despite him being so damn slow. So I'm very excited from that aspect. I'm just very curious to see, with no more excuses, because we have as much roster versatility as JB has ever had in his tenure here. I'm very excited to see how he uses these guys. That's where I'm at with the additions.
I also want to see a deeper, more versatile roster, or roster lineup combinations out there, because one of the things that throughout the season, the Cavs were like, we're going to go big. We're not really going to change from that. We're always going to play Isaac Okoro. Our bench rotations are going to be really short. And then when it got to the playoffs, it was like halfway through game one, it was like, well, we can't play Isaac Okoro because the spacing is really bad. And now we're going to roll with Jetty and the 4 starters. And that wasn't a lineup that we ever really experimented with in times that actually mattered. So it's like, I think we're going to talk about it later a little bit with does Isaac Okoro fall out of the rotation? It's like, as much as I don't really love Okoro's fit with this team, I hope nobody falls out of the rotation, because I want to see him going with a lot deeper of rotation. Because it's like, when you have depth, you don't want Donovan Mitchell having this 30 plus games where he's scoring 30 plus points. And that's a function of he's playing. If you look at his minutes, he was playing heavy minutes. So it's like, just, I'd like to just see more versatility, more lineups out there, more experimenting. Just use what you have and try to use it in very more unique ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we might as well just use this as a jumping off point to talk about JB and kind of, I don't think anyone would consider this a true make or break season for the Cavs, considering how young they are and how much potential they still have moving forward. But JB Bickerstaff and Jarrett Allen are two people who have been under the most fire over the offseason and for the collapse in the playoffs. And so I want to ask the question, whose seat is hotter at the moment, JB Bickerstaff or Jarrett Allen?
It's unquestionably JB Bickerstaff. Credit to him. 5-6 the first year, if you want to give him that, because of the interim and then kind of season ending, I believe, due to the pandemic. But 22 wins after that, 44 wins, 51 wins. Like I said, that's great during the regular season. But the man now has a 2-8 record, if I'm not mistaken, in the postseason. You can also factor in his regular season totality with Cleveland, which, as it stands now, I think is 122 and 125. So he's 3 wins under 500, and he's very close to getting there. But I mean, the knocks on JB are constant. The lack of play calling that fits the scenario that we're in, the lack of rotations that make sense at times. I think that's way deeper. That goes way deeper to me than Jarrett Allen just kind of wilting onto the lights. And make no mistake, everybody was feeling that way. Jarrett was the only one that had the guts to actually come out and say it, though. And granted, you don't want one of your stars or core members to come out and say that, but everybody was feeling it. So to me, in my opinion, JB Bickerstaff 100%. And while you made a note of this, Tony, it's not a make or break season for this current core, and maybe not even front office and Kobe Altman and company, if you want to throw him in there. It is undoubtedly a make or break season for JB Bickerstaff. If he doesn't win at least one postseason series, in my opinion, you have to kick the tires on other options.
It's a lot easier to replace a coach than it is to replace one of your 4 best players. And so you hit it on the head with everything JB kind of needs to prove at this point in his coaching career. Can he make the correct rotations? Can he generate offense for this team where now he really has no more excuses? He has all of the tools necessary to have one of the best offenses in the NBA, not just in offensive rating, but passing the eye test as well. Is he drawing up plays after timeouts? Is it going to hold up in the playoffs when there's, 4 to 7 games of the team game planning for you? There's a lot of things that JB has to prove. And while I tend to be more optimistic with JB than kind of the general fan base, I definitely am worried about if he's going to be able to make that leap, or if he's going to just kind of be one of those coaches who fits the early stages of a rebuild, but then once it gets to winning time, he needs to be replaced. I think those are questions we're going to see answered this season one way or another.
Yeah, before Jackson and Corey jump in here, I just want to add on there. By no means am I saying I don't believe in JB, because I too count myself among the ranks of thinking a little bit more optimistic than the average fan in regards to the head coaching situation here. But I'll go as far as to say I think he can and will win a series this year. And I think that will be enough to save his job. But if he doesn't, he's got to go.
I agree with that for sure. Corey or Jackson, how are you feeling about JB or Jared Allen, whichever angle you want to take?
I feel like JB has been given the all the tools needed to kind of fix the offensive woes of the team. Last year, I felt like it was pretty heavily reliant on the 2 guards to kind of carry the offensive load. And we all know JB Bickerstaff's a defensive-minded coach. That's why we brought in Luke Walton to help with the offensive work last year. That's why they brought in Strus and Niang in the offseason to kind of help with that. So I feel like the front office recognizes that the offense is kind of the weak point of the Cavs. Throughout the regular season, they want to kind of make it so it's more balanced. There's more options, more stuff for JB to work with. And I'm kind of under the belief that they're kind of seeing, like, can a defensive-minded coach with a lot of offensive talent make it work? I feel like a lot of the coaches that thrive in the modern NBA right now are offensive-minded coaches. Mike Brown is kind of the exception I've seen in the past few years, where a defensive coach can just come in and turn it around. But I feel like if this doesn't happen, the Cavs might recognize that they have enough defensive talent on their own, that they don't need a defensive-minded head coach like JB Bickerstaff to get them to the next level, and they might look in the opposite direction for a more offensive-minded, like Mike D'Antoni type coach. Not him exactly, but just that type of mindset that can really take this team to the next level. And you don't really want to think that JB Bickerstaff has to be the Mark Jackson to the Steve Kerr that can come in and take it to the next level. But unfortunately in the NBA, sometimes I don't think it's that JB doesn't have buy-in. I think that's definitely his main asset he has right now with this Cavs team, is that the players really seem to like him. They take him at his word. They'll follow him to the ends of the earth. It seems like there's very few players that come in that don't seem to buy into what the Cavs are doing. But sometimes you just need a different voice to shake up a room. And in regards to Jared Allen, I feel like Jared Allen is like, I think he's just the victim of the moment. He's the last face you remember from that series. There are a lot of fingers you could point in that series, and unfortunately, because Jared's quote is the last thing that kind of stands out in that series, and the offensive rebounding issues, which were plaguing the Cavs the entire regular season, and no one really seemed to say a word about it until it came to the Knicks series.
Except when Kevin Love was out there. We always want to get that disclaimer in.
Thank you. And but yeah, no one wanted to mention a word about the woes until it came to postseason time. They're like, huh, you know what? This rebounding thing is kind of a problem. And then all it took was us to get our ass kicked 4-1, and then everyone started to recognize. And then Jarrett, like Max said, had the guts to say what no one else was going to say, and he gets lambasted by everyone under the sun. So I think Jarrett, as long as he like low key kind of took a step back last year, but not in the level where everyone should be kind of concerned at his level of development. But I think that's just also him finding his way within the team, because there's so many players taking steps, and someone has to take a step back for someone to take a step forward. It's not everyone just gets to move up at the same level.
What would it take for the Cavs to want to move on from Jared Allen as soon as next season? I think that's the real question.
I think it's fair to say that they're both equally on the hot seat, but maybe Jared's a little more on the hot seat, just because when you look at the teams that have consistently won, they're teams that are playing 4 out. Like even when you're looking at FIBA basketball, I know it's a lot different, but it's like everyone who's on the court on the teams that made it far, they're people who are multifaceted, and it's just really hard to get away with, 2 bigs who can't really dribble or pass or shoot. So it's like it's important to remember the Cavs didn't get Jared Allen to build around Evan Mobley, and they didn't draft Evan Mobley to build around Jared Allen. It was kind of, they got Jared Allen for a really good deal, and then they, moved up in the draft. So if you could, if the Cavs knew they were going to get Evan Mobley in the draft, I think they probably don't make that trade for Jared Allen, because it's just not, I just don't know if it can fit. We know that the defense is good in the regular season, but you have to make so many other compromises throughout your roster to kind of make up for it, that you're just kind of at a spot where it's like, well, wouldn't it just be better if we just, moved on from Jared Allen and tried to see if we can get pieces that fit a little better around Evan Mobley? So, I get that he's not ready to play the 5, but when you're talking about the last 5 minutes of a playoff game, there's situations where you see Jared Allen not out there, in your best five-man lineup. And if that's the case, then it's probably not the best use of your resources.
I feel like a really interesting idea is that if Evan Mobley's development kind of dictates the future of Jared Allen in a way, if Evan Mobley is able to grow into this stretch 5, then there really is no need for Jared Allen to be on the roster, I feel like, because you can slot in a smaller 4 and then play, like Jackson said, more of a spread 5, out on the floor and decongest the rim. But at the same time, Jared Allen is such a valuable player for this Cavs team. But if we really need the Cavs to reach their ceiling, I think most coaches that will come in will struggle with the 2 big lineup offensively and think of ways, if they're both going to stay at this level where they're both kind of only one of them should be on the floor when it gets to crunch time, then they're really going to have to figure out what the identity of this team needs to be moving forward. And I think that might be the next coach's issue, and if that's going to be the case.
And it's like we all want to see Evan Mobley become a better shooter, but what evidence have we really seen that that's something that's going to happen? His free throw percentage has stagnated. He's not taking threes. It's like for it to work with Jared Allen, he needs to be better than a Larry Nance Jr. 3-point shooter, which Larry Nance Jr. had decent, he looked like somebody who could shoot. He was somebody who shot at a decent percentage, but teams weren't covering him. Teams weren't respecting him as a shooter. And if Evan Mobley became that, I think we would all be, happy, I guess. But in the playoffs, they're still not covering him. He's not somebody who has gravity when he's out there on the perimeter. And that's what this team needs if you're going to have somebody like Jared Allen out there. So that's where it's like, I think the bar is so high for what Evan Mobley would have to become for it to actually work in the half court, that it's like, I just don't know if it can. And it's not really like a knock on Jared Allen. It's just kind of a knock on his archetype. And that's why we saw, somebody who is a really good rim running center who can defend go for it, was essentially a really late first round pick.
I think that's the big distinction to make here when kind of focusing on that original question, who has a hotter seat right now. I think they're facing pressure for different reasons. I don't think anyone is questioning Jared Allen's talent as an NBA player. It's more his fit with the team, Whereas with JB, the question is he cut out for the job? Can he handle this? I think most people recognize that Jarrett Allen is cut out to be a very good player on a competitive team. The difference is he's just sharing the front court with another player who shares a lot of the same qualities. They kind of step over each other at certain points. And it's really more of, do they have to move on, not because Jarrett Allen is a bad player, but is it because they need to find something that fits with the rest of this team? And that's why I'm excited about Strus and Niang, because again, and this goes for JB too, if this core is going to work, that's reasonably the best you're going to do at surrounding them with a better supporting cast and really opening up the floor as much as you can with two non-shooters out there at the same time. So, and again, if Evan Mobley develops, that changes it too. So I would put myself on the side of JB being on the hotter seat, but I definitely understand why there's growing concern about Allen's fit long term, even if I'm a little more optimistic.
Yeah, I don't think it's like a knock against the Cavs for being into this problem. We have to remember that when Jarrett Allen was acquired, the Cavs were in the mindset of taking every dart they possibly could and throwing it on the dartboard. And when you stumble into acquiring a Jarrett Allen type player in a trade, I don't think Kobe Altman was immediately like, all right, this is one of our build, like this is going to have to be one of the three players we're building around going forward. And then you get Evan Mobley because the Rockets decide to take Jalen Green, which at the time everyone still was perplexed. I think that case still stands, but you can't really predict that type of stuff. And then it's just a good problem to have in the moment. But as it gets fleshed out over time, a good problem then just becomes a problem. And if when you're trying to figure out a basketball fit versus assembling like a 2K level roster of just trying to get the highest rated players in a room and then just playing it yourself so you win every time, that's not how like the real NBA works. And Kobe Altman, it's like there are definitely going to be ways to get out of it. I mean, Jarrett Allen's on a great contract, a very team-friendly contract. Even with his stock, quote unquote, lower due to that postseason series, we were still seeing that teams were very interested in Jarrett Allen. They were making calls. So if Jarrett Allen even has like a similar year or year in between last year and the year before where he was an all-star level player, then you definitely, the Cavs will have ways to kind of shift this roster around, but you won't be able to do it with such nice cap flexibility that they had going into this summer.
We could very much be facing a scenario in which both are not on the Cavaliers come next season. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, well, on that topic, I think we can hit this one relatively quick because every Cleveland talk show is going to be discussing this all year long. So we really don't need to go too in depth. But it is something to keep in mind for better or worse entering this season is Donovan Mitchell's future. And I want to know how you guys feel. How much will this season impact Donovan Mitchell's future decision when it comes to staying in Cleveland?
I think it's really going to come down to the season in this group. He needs to believe that this is the group for him, that this is the group that gives him the best chance to win, that the pieces fit, so it's like, it, like this is going to be it, I think. So you just really need to see something from this group that what they're doing can transfer to the playoffs to give Donovan Mitchell a reason to stay. Because when he was on the Jazz, he had playoff success. So he's not going to be happy with just, hey, we won our first round series and then got, lost in 5 in the second round. So you got to give him something to believe in. You got to, this group needs to show him that this is the place for him.
When I look at it in two different ways. One, he's got a player option for 2025-26, if I'm not mistaken. So, that's out in the distance. From a Cleveland perspective, they're under no obligation to trade him, this season. If they want to look at that option next season, if he hasn't given them a committal, if he's still non-committal heading into next offseason, yeah, you entertain the idea of moving him. From Donovan Mitchell's perspective, I would have to agree with Jackson. I mean, if he feels in any way that the roster that they have fielded is not good enough to get him to that next level in his career, because he, like Jackson said, has already experienced playoff success to a degree, with Utah. I think he's eager to take that next step, whether that's making it to the, the conference championship round, or making it to NBA finals. I think if the Cavs are not able to make him at least feel like they can compete for no later the second to third round of the playoffs, then I think you really have to consider the very real possibility that Donovan Mitchell may opt out of that player option when he has the chance, or demand a trade as soon as 2024-25. So that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I feel like Donovan Mitchell is I mean, I agree with Jackson. I think we talked about this the last time I was on this podcast, that I feel like that the Cavs want to be I think in this league you have to be more proactive with these types of players than just kind of like crossing your fingers and hoping in the goodwill of just thinking the players are going to repay you for ever so graciously taking a swing on them. I think that Kobe Allman's a pretty smart GM. I haven't seen many cases in which I would ever think low of his ability to kind of read the room. And Cleveland's a city that is used to players kind of wanting to walk out the door at given times. So I think the Cavs have enough building blocks where they can move on from this Donovan Mitchell situation kind of unscathed if they decide that after this season, the team and him meet and they decide, this was a nice try, but I don't think this is heading in the direction that we kind of want. And I don't want to feel like every season we have is our back against the wall of trying to please Donovan Mitchell and making him want to stay. Because I think a lot of the other Cavaliers who have been here, like Mobley, Allen, and Garland, want to stay here the long term, and I don't think they'll apply the same pressure to the front office that Donovan Mitchell would. And you kind of hope with the jumps that we're trying to see from Mobley and Garland in the future that there doesn't need to be a world in which Donovan Mitchell has to be on this roster in order for the team to get to the levels that we think they're capable of. Obviously, having Donovan Mitchell here is a huge asset to the team. He is the team's best player, and he really can carry the team on his back in ways that we didn't see other players do in seasons prior. So Donovan Mitchell's future in Cleveland, I feel like, is probably dictated by what kind of, if he sees organizational and playoff success. I don't know if the Cavs got the second seed in the East, he'd be like, oh, nice. And then they just lose in the first round, be like, well, at least we were the second seed. And then they'll probably promise that JB will leave and they'll let Donovan Mitchell have a say in whatever coach they bring in. I don't know if he wants to go through that again. I mean, he experienced levels of success in Utah. Like regular season, he was the 1 seed in one of his years of being there. He was always a perennial all NBA type player. And he had Quinn Snyder, who's one of the best coaches in the league, and he wanted to leave there. And the Cavs aren't a big market team where they're going to really allure him to stay. I'm not going to join the Knicks mass of saying that he's going to stay, like he wants to go to New York, but we all would be lying to ourselves that big players don't want to play in big cities. And Donovan Mitchell has done nothing to indicate he wants to play elsewhere. But every player probably wants to play on the biggest stage imaginable, unless there's a reason for their own career that they would want to move onward.
He's saying all the right things, right? Like he's said all the right things. The only thing he hasn't really done is commit. And
I don't think in Utah he did anything similar to that either, though. I feel like he just it was more of one of the more quiet, I want to get out of here type of requests of anyone. I mean, he's not like Damian Lillard posting on his Instagram every 2 minutes.
Subliminal messages.
I don't even know if it's subliminal at this point. I think he's just flat out saying where he wants to go.
Yeah, but to that point, to be fair, I do think at least some of the Utah stuff was maybe Rudy Gobert influence that, I think that was just a whole drama going on there that maybe he wasn't too happy with that pairing. And you would hope that won't happen in Cleveland. And I think that's kind of the root of the question is I really don't think it's so far ahead in the future still as player option that things would have to really crumble for Donovan Mitchell to demand a trade. I think I don't want to, jinx anything, but I do think it's not necessarily make or break in terms of his future in Cleveland. But as Jackson said, you just have to keep reassuring him that this is the place where he can win. And the only way to do that is to win basketball games. You have to, at some point, all of this potential that Mobley, Garland, and this team has, it has to turn into a reality. And I think that this is a perfect place for Donovan Mitchell to be the lead guard, to be the star and see success. And so they just have to prove it.
One thing I will say is I think Donovan Mitchell is still kind of underrated by the overall NBA landscape. He's one of the best scorers in the entire league, truly a 3-level scorer who can get can get wherever he wants on the court whenever. But and there's still room for him to grow as a distributor and stuff. But he's somebody who deserves to have the team kind of built around him. And, we'll see how the team looks this year. It's definitely going to be built more around him with shooters, but there's no other player, I think, who's kind of his level of skill where the team isn't built specifically around what they do best. And kind of like what Mac was saying in the beginning about him having to have a ton of 30-point games. It's because the team wasn't built around him. It was the team was built through him to an extent where like, hey, we don't really have a functioning offense. So Donovan, if you're going to have to save us again tonight, or we're going to lose to the Pacers. So it's like, if I'm Donovan Mitchell, it's like, well, I'm kind of here with a team that doesn't fit around me, and I think I'm better than what I'm getting credit for. And I think if I went somewhere else, they would definitely build around me. And I think if a team built around me, I could take them to the next level. That's kind of my thinking. And that's where it's like the Cavs have to show them that no, like Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, and potentially Jared Allen, that's the fit. That's the core that is going to help you be the best version of yourself.
For me, it just kind of makes me think, like, even more so than JB Bickerstaff, Kobe Altman is going to have a tough job this year and walking a fine line between straddling Evan Mobley's development, which most fans think that's what the title hopes, tend to hinge on, rather than Donovan Mitchell's era here in Cleveland. Like, he's going to have a tough time not like immediately rushing to a quick decision on trading somebody like a Jared Allen or an Isaac Okoro or something if the season gets off to a rough start. So he's going to have a tough task at hand as well.
Moving into this now, we're going to get into some rapid fire questions, mostly just some true or false statements that I want to pass along to you guys. We'll start off here. True or false, the Cavaliers will have multiple All-Stars this season.
I'll start. I will say it's true. And I will go even further and say that it's gonna be the backcourt. I think it's gonna be Darius and Donovan as the two. I don't know if I see the Evan Mobley All-Star leap, and I think it's the East center position is too deep, I think, for Jarrett to kind of contend for that, especially with how many mouths to feed this offense has too.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I will say I question if Darius Garland would be the second one there, even though I think he's the easy pick. Just when you look at kind of like the FIBA team and just how the general national media seems to think about Garland, he seems very underrated, whereas Mobley did finish third in Defensive Player of the Year voting. So I could see him sneaking in there as the second All-Star for Cleveland. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell is as close to a lock as you can get. But I would pick them to have two All-Stars as well. Whether it's Garland or Mobley as the second one, I don't think that they're going to have so much regular season success and not get rewarded for it this time.
I'm gonna go 3. I think they end up. I have to be the contrarian here. I think the backcourt makes it in. Although the Eastern guard, the guards in the East, that's just a deep.
That's where it gets tough
right there. Yeah. So if it would not surprise me at all if Darius Garland again did make it in, as you guys point out, I think Donovan Mitchell is as close to a lock guarantee, whether it be a starter or a reserve, he's gonna make it in. I do think Evan Mobley takes enough of a leap offensively this season to have more eyeballs put upon him. So I'm going to go Darius, Donovan, Evan Mobley. Jared Allen has no chance.
Yeah, unfortunately, but go ahead,
I'm
Jackson.
going false just because there's a lot of people and the All-Star team isn't that big. So, there's going to be a lot of...
Who is the lone All-Star? Is it Donovan?
Yeah. It's just, I think it's tough for Darius Garland because all the other guards that would take his spot, you're looking at like Halliburton, Trae Young, someone he's going to be competing with, guys like Jimmy Butler, where you're just like, they're going to get those spots just kind of how their team's constructed and kind of the name recognition where they're going to have a lot more gaudy points. And I don't think like Darius Garland, if you were to guess his stat line, I think it's like a good season would be like 20 and 10. And I don't know if 20 and 10 is enough with what those guys are going to be putting up. And it's just the front court is really deep. I think Evan Mobley's the best chance, but it's also tough for somebody who again, a great season would be 20 and 10. It's tough for a 20 and 10 guy to be an all-star when you're, talking about guys like that. So I'm just going to say false.
Time to queue up the Max Strus All-Star campaign agenda. Yeah, it's going to be a fun season to watch.
Yeah, I think for Mobley, I mean, if Jaren Jackson was in the All-Star game, I feel like Mobley should be able to get in there, but we don't have to open up that whole conversation. We'll move along to our next question here. True or false, Isaac Okoro will fall out of the main rotation?
I'll start this one off and say true, just because he kind of fell out of the rotation in the playoffs. So, and I think JB's rotation is much smaller than it should be during the regular season. So I think there's going to be at least a couple of games where he's a healthy DNP. Even though I don't think Okoro fits great, I would like to see him continue to play just because I think they have a deep team.
Tony, you know I'm right up there with you in regards to the Isaac Okoro fan club, so I'm going to go false here. I understand the rationale, though, because you added shooters, and Isaac Okoro has not yet proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he can be a respectable shooter. And to Jackson's point, could he get pulled come the postseason time? That's certainly a possibility, but I'm going to be a believer here and think that Isaac Okoro takes a semi jump this season. I don't think he has to immediately come into the season focusing strictly on becoming a knockdown shooter. I think the added spacing will help him as a cutter. I think it'll open up a lot more in regards to transition baskets for him. I don't think he falls out, but I definitely think that he's going to experience yet another minutes drop as he has the past couple of seasons.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I would say when I kind of ran through the rotation, it's the starting five with Max Strus in there. You have LeVert, Niang, and then really that eighth spot to me is going to be Okoro throughout most of the season. I'd be surprised if anyone really surpassed him consistently. There might be nights and maybe even in the playoffs he'll be taken out of it, but he was taken out of the rotation in last year's playoffs, and I didn't want him to be because I still think he had value on the defensive end. So that's just where I am on the Okoro fan club. But I do think, he doesn't even need to make a leap. I think just being with the second unit will help him a lot because he will no longer be playing next to two non-shooters. Hopefully it'll only be Mobley or Allen out there with him. You put Niang out there, you let him run alongside LeVert. Maybe the pace will be a little quicker. And so I think you're going to see Okoro get an opportunity to play to his strengths for really one of the first times in his career. The last two seasons, he has really been forced to be something that he's just not yet, which is that 3-and-D wing. He's made progress, but that's still not his game. It never was coming out of college. And so it's less of a leap and more of just adjusting his role to something that matches him. And I think being that eighth man in the rotation, we could see him thrive in a new way that maybe doesn't show up in the stat sheet, but you see on a night-to-night basis on the floor.
Yeah, I agree with Tony. I feel like Okoro's best advantage right now for staying in the rotation is that JB Bickerstaff is his coach. I think JB is a guy who always wants a defensive edge in a game, and I think JB's biggest crush on the roster is by far Isaac Okoro. I think that it will take a massive offensive slump where he just is not doing it at all for him to get yanked permanently for this rotation. I think there's always going to be a place in a JB Bickerstaff rotation, especially in the regular season for Isaac Okoro. I mean, he has been yanked from the past two postseason rotations and still has found a way to squeak his way back into major minutes for a Cavs team. And I think we see he thrives in shorter minutes alongside a more balanced offensive lineup. So I think there's definitely a recipe in which we're going to sit and notice that Isaac Okoro plays a lot more games than we were probably expecting at the beginning of the season.
I am interested to see kind of what he does in that eighth man role, just because he's just out there and it just feels like he's never playing basketball in the sense that he's just kind of going into the spots that he's kind of just been told to go into. And it's he's a good shooter, but he is a pretty decent shooter and he can finish at the basket, but it's just kind of I want to see him play basketball. I just don't want to see him try to do those two things. So
how much of that is on JB too, though? How much of that is on him?
So I don't think Okoro has like a great feel for the game. And I think that kind of shows through on the defensive end as well in different ways. But yeah, it's definitely on JB because he's I don't think he's ever put Okoro into a position to really succeed. In the beginning, it was like, hey, you're going to be out here with a bunch of guys that don't really fit around you, and you are a 19-year-old rookie, so have fun. I don't think that's really great. And then after that, it was like, well, you got to fit into a team with with two bigs, and you're not going to have the ball in your hand. So that's a tough like spot for him to be in for somebody who is as raw as he is. And we all knew that coming into the league, that he's somebody who was not a project, but somebody who still needed to find what they do best on the offensive end of the court. So it's just like, I just want to see him kind of have the freedom to play basketball, really.
I feel like Okoro is just like the victim of his draft class, because if Okoro was taken somewhere like from the 17th pick onward, teams would still be viewing him as like one of their fun projects that they still see a future in. But because he was taken 5th in a very weak draft class at the time, that just because you're slapped with the 5th pick in the draft, it's like, all right, so if you're not going to be a superstar level player, then this pick was kind of worthless. But at the same time, like, I agree with Jackson 100%. It's like he basically is the victim of the roster too, because the roster is dictating the play style, and the Cavs offense for however many years has not been an offensive roster in the slightest. It's been a slog. The identity of the team is that we're going to grind our way to victories. It's not that we're just going to dominate in the given moment and have like these offensive outbursts. Yes, there's a Cavalanche once in a while, but at the same time, like Okoro, you're never like throwing his name into the Cavalanche type conversation, because it's hard to be in a Cavalanche when your job is to just stand in the corner and take your X amount of 3-pointers just to say, hey, respect my shot because I took 5 3-pointers this game.
I think it's just
sorry. No, it's fine. It's just that it feels like his game has become so unnatural because that's what the offensive system is making him become.
I think it's also fair to say he's a victim of how skilled he is. Like, he's really athletic. He has good size. He's a great defender. He's a good finisher at the rim, and he is a better shooter than I think we give him credit for being. It's just that there's no such thing as like a space 2, like that's kind of the issue, where it's like he's just not trusted to play 5-on-5 basketball. He's treated like, the high schooler that's allowed to play in your pickup run just because you needed one more guy, but you're like, please don't, do anything too crazy. Like, that's how he's treated out there. And that's, I think like all of the issues kind of come back to that.
Yeah, I think there's just a combination of so many factors that have really worked against Okoro, whether it be his draft position, the role he's been given with the team, kind of the timeline speeding up on him. He's the only member of the core, I think, who has actually been negatively impacted by the Donovan Mitchell trade, just because it really sped up where he needs to be in that lineup. And all things considered, I genuinely am impressed that he still managed to find success in this starting lineup last year. I know there were still problems and limitations, but for all the things that have been asked of him for a guy who is still so young, he has done a reasonably good job at filling that role. And I do think now that he is going to hopefully be in a more comfortable bench role, we'll be able to see him focus more on his strengths again and have somewhat of a normal progression and development that we typically see from guys like that.
Yeah, I think the additions of Strus and Niang have kind of defined his next role. So that's good for him. Something he hasn't really had.
Wrapping this up here, we'll ask one final question. True or false, the Cleveland Cavaliers will be title contenders next season?
Why you have to do that?
So, can I pass? Okay, so, the frustrating thing is I think they have the skill to be a title contender. I think they have the talent. I think right now we're seeing a really evened out, watered down NBA where I think I don't think there's much separation between them and whoever you consider the best team in the East, especially if you're comparing them to Miami. But it's kind of like the intangibles. I feel like they're just losing around the margins in the sense of losing close games. ATOs never go good. I just feel like there's still just something that's not quite there. So I'm going to say false, but true. Like, I don't think they're going to be title contenders, but if you told me that they were, I would believe it because they have the skill to be so.
I want to piggyback off Jackson because I actually agree for every single reason he just said. I feel like the Cavs just don't have the wherewithal where I like the roster. You just look at it. Don't look at the experience level of the players. Just look at the fit. Look how talented they are top to bottom. It's a yes that they should compete for the championship this year. But you also need to keep in mind that I don't think this team is going to go from losing to the Knicks 4-1 in the opening round to then just magically getting all the way to the finals and winning so many series in a row. I think they haven't been battle tested enough where I expect them to know how to handle situations. I mean, just look at the Nuggets this year. How many years of heartbreak did they have to go through to get to the point that they got to? I don't think the Cavs have had those types of tests. I don't think that we're going to look back like a year from now and be like, man, that play-in loss to Brooklyn in that Knicks series really just taught them how to get through the tough times and win 4 series in a row. But I think they still have so many things to learn between now and a playoff series win. Not only that, but to get to a championship. Nevertheless, I think there's just too many roadblocks between now and then. But I think 2 years from now, this could easily, like, that's where their goal should be, to be in that like top 4 in the league type conversation.
I think all of that is fair to say. I mean, as much as I consider myself a positive, optimistic person, I think we're just not at that point yet, as much as it pains me to say that. Like, I think this past season, if you were to ask me if we would have won at least one playoff series, I would have said yes, although that did not happen. Heading into this next season, as Corey said, there's absolutely no way you go from getting your ass kicked and being ousted in 5 games to going to immediate championship contention. So no, I don't think the additions that we've made can justifiably sway public opinion in that regard.
Yeah, I'll agree with everyone here. I think if you ask the Cavs from their perspective, they should be thinking we're competing for a title this year. We're going as far as we can. But from a realistic standpoint, every other team that I would consider like an actual contender, Denver, Milwaukee, Boston, like all these teams have been there before. They've been tested. They've been through years and years of adversity. Even before they got to that stage, they were going through it. And the Cavs are still just so early in that process. I think the journey to becoming a champion in the NBA is such a long one compared to a lot of other sports where you really need to be tested and go through these stages that the Cavs are going through right now. So it would surprise me if they made that jump so quickly. I still think they should be playing with that expectations on themselves that they need to go as far as they can. And I wouldn't be like completely surprised if they made it to the finals just because the NBA is a little more watered down than it has been in recent years. I wouldn't pick them to get past those top teams. I just want them to be competitive against those teams is really all it comes down to. They can't go out in 5 games in the fashion that they just did. They need to show a little more heart and more results. Even though the process is still very important, this is all part of it. They need to prove to me that they can go toe-to-toe with these teams, at least a little bit.
I will say, I think that like experience and like having to lose together is a little overrated. I think a lot of times you see teams lose like that because they have holes in their roster or their roster is not really like optimized around their best players. And I think that's kind of like why we don't think that the Cavs are going to be, one of those teams, is because we kind of, as we said earlier, we don't trust JB. I think that was the consensus. And we don't, we have questions about Jared Allen. And when you have questions about those, one of your top 4 players fitting with the rest of your team and the head coach, even if you have similar talent, it's hard to say that they're going to maximize it to the level that they should. So
all I'm hearing is the addition of former NBA champion Tristan Thompson does not make the Cavs title contenders this season.
Maybe.
You know who would though? Larry Nance. And Jackson's the first one to agree with that.
We're cutting that, right?
Let's bring back all the former Cavs. We'll just have
Jackson's
the whole bench
favorites.
full of all the hits.
Not all the former Cavs.
Torian Prince.
Yes.
Great one.
Alec
Yes.
Burks.
Yes.
Let's just keep going.
I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. I want to thank everyone so much for listening. Please consider hitting subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all of us on Twitter or X. All the links will be in the description. And thanks again for watching, and go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs.